So to be able to cognitively to know what a person's going through, and then sometimes as well emotional empathy, that we actually begin to feel what they're feeling, because this improves connection. And when a person feels that they are being totally listened to, when a person feels that you are with them and showing empathy, the quality of the conversation changes dramatically. And I believe the outcome can change dramatically too.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited about the show today. This is one of my very favorite topics, emotional intelligence. And so we're going to talk about practical ways to help you grow and develop your emotional intelligence. So my guest on the show today is Irvine Nugent. Irvine is an emotional intelligence expert. He's an author. He's just an absolute treasure. So what I love about the way we talk about emotional intelligence today is Irvine walks us through kind of 4 parts to look at emotional intelligence and very practical things in each of those parts. So pay real close attention to all the little steps you can take to grow yours. And I'll kind of sum up by saying this. What made me so hopeful in this whole conversation is Irvine said, look, anybody can get better at this. So hopefully over the next 30 minutes, you'll find some ways you can get better in this too.
The Workplace Therapist Show is sponsored by the Leadership Foundry. Bringing a cutting-edge, real-world approach to leadership development, the Leadership Foundry partners with each client organization to create a custom-tailored experience, virtual or in person, that combines innovative leadership content, world-class facilitators, and one-on-one coaching to ensure your leaders have everything they need to grow and thrive. To find out more and to design your one-of-a-kind program, visit myleadershipfoundry.com.
Irvine, really great to have you on the show today. I'm really excited about our conversation around emotional intelligence and all the places that could take us. So before we kind of jump into our conversation around emotional intelligence, just for our listeners, tell us a little bit about you. What are kind of the things that you do in your day-to-day life, and what kind of got you here?
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm delighted. I primarily focus my work on working with organizations, leaders, and managers on the area of emotional intelligence. I do that in a number of different ways, through training and through speaking. And at the heart of what I do is really helping people and organizations create more human workspaces where we can thrive in the space that we spend so much time in. And for me, through my own experience, emotions have so much to do with that and how we show up and the conversations we have. So I've always been passionate about that. I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles there, and I grew up in a very conflictual society. And I think it placed just in my heart a desire to improve humanity, that we're so much better than that, and that we can do so much better. And so my career has really been striving to do that.
Amen, brother. I couldn't speak it better. I agree completely about trying to improve our workplaces and those dynamics and relationships. And interesting how your background kind of contributed to you going down this path.
Yes.
In many ways kind of help us kind of heal how we operate and work together. Well, so I love this topic of emotional intelligence. I think it's such a powerful thing for us. I've heard lots of different definitions. So maybe a good starting place is, what's yours? If someone grabbed you in the street and said, Irvine, this thing called emotional intelligence, what is it? How would you define it for her or him?
So here's what I would say to them. I'd say it's your ability to do 4 things. You are able, first of all, to be self-aware, know what you're feeling in the moment.
Okay.
The second thing is knowing that you have a set of tools that you can use to manage those emotions.
Okay.
The third thing is that you're able to look at other people and to know and feel a little bit about what they're going through, and to recognize those emotions. And then the fourth thing is you're using all that information to manage the relationship to the outcome, to the best outcome in the situation.
Okay. All right. So we got that self-awareness. So I'm aware of my own emotions, what I'm feeling, thinking. I've got tools so I can manage those, so I can regulate those.
Yes.
So if I'm really mad at somebody in traffic, I don't drive them off the road, right? That's
Absolutely.
good.
Amen to that.
I'm able to kind of put myself in other people's shoes and try and know and feel what they might be experiencing. And then I use all that stuff to try and make that relationship healthier. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So Gosh, well, maybe a good starting place. Let's just start with the first one, self-awareness. Is there ways we can develop better self-awareness?
Yeah. So, self-awareness is really is the foundation. And in my experience, the better the manager and the leader, what I tend to find is the more self-aware they are. And how to become more self-aware? Well, we live in a busy world where the last thing we tend to do is check in with ourselves. And what we need to do is to build practices in our daily life where we are actively checking in. And what I mean by checking in is really, where are we at emotionally? What are we feeling in the moment? And then physically, because part of the wisdom of our body is that the body tells us, the body reacts. We can tell signs physiologically that we're in an emotional state before we're even conscious of it. So the more aware we are of what's happening in our body, the stronger we are at being self-aware.
Yeah. So I want to actually back up a little bit. As you were talking, I had a thought and a question. So as we go into this idea of emotional intelligence, I don't know, I'm going to throw you a curveball right out of the gate, Irvine. So hopefully it's not too hard. Is this something you're born with, or is this something that you develop over time, or is it a little bit of both? I would love your thoughts on that, because...
So it's a great question. A great question. I definitely come down in the opinion that depending on your socialization growing up, so I think everyone is born with a clean slate. But some people have more socialization skills, so they're a little better at emotional intelligence right out of the gate. However, as a skill, everyone can learn to improve their emotional intelligence. And no matter what age you are, that's the beautiful thing about it. So I think I have encountered managers and leaders who really, their skills were incredibly poor. And through some effort and dedication over a year, they dramatically improved those skills.
Oh, great. Okay, so there's hope for us all is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely, yes. And one would hope as we get older, we are wiser. Not always, but one would hope, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we talked about self-awareness, and I like you gave us a nice, simple, practical step. Check in with yourself regularly, see how you're feeling, what your body's telling you. Okay, so your second step was around managing those emotions, kind of how you can regulate that a little bit. Do you have any tips for us around that one?
Yeah, so first of all, we tend to be creatures of habit and patterns. And so one of the things is if we can realize some of the patterns that evoke certain emotions. So let me give you an example. You're at work and your relationship with Johnny is not the best. In fact, he just kind of presses your button. And so to know that you're going into a meeting with someone that probably will press your button, and then to know, well, what am I going to do when that happens? Is kind of where we're on about regulating your emotions. So more than often, I'm going to be frustrated or even a little angry. And so like one of the practices I talk about is called a 7-second reset. So it's this ability just to stop, put your feet on the ground, which takes you out of some emotionality in your head. Breathe in for 3 seconds, breathe out for 3 seconds, and make any adjustments. And that's something you can do. And so instead of reacting and saying something you later regret, it can just be the difference then of choosing something that's more thoughtful. Yeah. So instead of saying something nasty or something sarcastic, you can kind of swap that up and say a curious question or something that changes the tone.
So what I love about this is you're using past experiences to plan and prepare for the same thing likely happening again.
Absolutely.
So you're saying, okay, gosh, every time I go into this meeting with this person, they just drive me crazy. How Absolutely. Am I going to operate differently?
Absolutely.
And then hopefully those skills will carry into new situations where a new person drives you crazy. And you
totally. Or it can even be, Brad, I was working with a client a few weeks ago, and one of the situations is they went into a meeting every week and a person would talk over them, and it triggered them and it shut them down. And so what we had to work on in that situation was to be present to that and to actually be a little more forceful and to be able to say, no, actually, I'm not finished. So it can work. There's all different ways, but there are patterns. And the more aware we are of those patterns, then we can use these tools to really improve how we respond.
So, I think triggers is interesting. It sounds like some of these triggers, they're going to be different for different people. A lot from our own background, childhood, things that just kind of, rub us the wrong way. Do you have any tips for how we can start to notice even those patterns around
So
triggers?
it's a great. So first of all, I use a word for triggers. I call it trigger print. So we have a fingerprint, and it's different, and we all have a trigger print. Some of our triggers are the same. Evolution has taught us, if we're falling off a building, we're all going to look afraid. But then, as you say, it is unique to us. It's our childhood, it's our adolescence, it's experiences that happened long ago or experiences that happened 2 weeks ago that in some way are creating a pattern. And that's what we're really looking for. We're looking for this ability to know in certain situations, here's how I tend to react. And part of that, there's two kind of processes I would say. One is to be a little more reflective. So when you've had a really bad day, when you've done behaviors like or said something that you're like, ugh, I wish I hadn't said that, just to kind of, instead of being judgmental, I like to say, put on a scientist coat and say, just be curious. What happened there? What is it that got my goat? Why did I respond? And if you uncover that, more often than not, what you're going to find is a value that was violated. Something that you hold dear that someone got in the way of. And that is very powerful to know that, because then you'll know in certain situations, I will tend to react in the same way. And once we know that, we then can have tools that we can use in those situations, be it everything from visualizing the power of vision, a different response, to the exercise I talked about, a reset, to even kind of slowing things down and just stopping or even walking away from a situation. There's all different options to us, but to have those options is incredibly important.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. I love the idea of what was that value that was violated.
Yeah, value that's violated.
And then I think that's important. And of course, being curious around that. I had a therapy mentor years ago, and he would say, when you've had one of these events like this, ask yourself, when was the time you felt like that before?
Yeah.
And then when was the time you felt like that before? And then when was the time you felt like that before? You just keep tracking back until you kind of see where that pattern, or maybe where that trigger print started. It turns out I was 7 years old and this thing happened, and then ever since, that started the pattern for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. The client I referred to that shut down when she was talked over, the more she reflected on that was a pattern at home. That basically she was shut down at the dinner table, and it just continued throughout her life.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So we can do therapy around this too. This is good.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So we talked about self-awareness. We talked about managing our emotions. I love that idea you've got around trigger print. I think that's a beautiful phrase and idea. Now let's go to number 3. Number 3 was kind of knowing and feeling knowing how others feel and are thinking, like trying to put yourself in other people's shoes. I think that's so very, very important. How do we do that better?
So there's two main suggestions I have in this area. First of all is to learn to read people's faces better. So I teach a lot on recognizing emotions. We have some universal emotions that are shown in people's faces, no matter what culture you are, what sex you are, it shows the same. So sadness shows the same, happiness, disgust, contempt, fear. So to be able to realize what those look like in the face. Yeah. Now, we'll never know why it's there. We know it's there. We know they're feeling this. We can't read their thoughts. But it's data that really helps us be, depending on the circumstance, to have better conversations. So that's powerful. The second thing then is to increase our empathy. And so empathy is such a powerful tool. So to be able to cognitively to know what a person's going through, and then sometimes as well emotional empathy, that we actually begin to feel what they're feeling, because this improves connection. And, when a person feels that they are being totally listened to, when a person feels that you are with them and showing empathy, the quality of the conversation changes dramatically. And I believe the outcome can change dramatically too.
Okay, so Irvine, I want to dig into that one a little bit more because this is touching on something really important. I think everyone thinks they're decent at, but we could probably all get better, and that's listening. So what are some good tools for how we can listen more? Because I think if we're listening really, really well, I think those other individuals are going to experience us as more empathetic.
Yeah. So, great topic. So first of all, the first thing I would say is know your barriers. So be honest with yourself. Again, we've talked about patterns when it comes to emotions. We have patterns when it comes to listening. what are some of the patterns that you find that disconnects you from a conversation? So some of the popular ones are, we're already formulating responses as the person's speaking.
Yeah.
And that, of course, absolutely takes us away from being present. Sometimes we'll jump to conclusions. So we'll find ourselves kind of the content and we're reflecting on the content. To realize your emotional and a situation before you go into a conversation. So in other words, if you've just come off a really difficult conversation or an argument, or if you're tired, or if you are hungry, all of that is going to impact the power to listen. So to be really more methodical about the listening is incredibly important. Then during the conversation, use some techniques when it comes to listening, like, for example, paraphrasing. So when a person has talked to you, very often it just can be helpful for you to say, let me just paraphrase what I think you've just said to me. And that's amazing, because sometimes people say, well, actually, no, this is what I meant. And it also signals to the other person, I am engaged, I'm actively listening, because that's what we want people to feel. We want them to feel we're with them. And then just the third thing I would say, Brendan, is body language. Is our body language showing that I am fully engaged with you? Am I smiling? Am I nodding? Am I giving prompts that I'm listening and following? Is my body open? Am I engaged with you? Am I mirroring what you're saying? All of that signals I'm connected.
Yeah, Irvine, that's fantastic stuff. This is great. So I'm going to tell you kind of a funny story. Several years ago, when I was teaching a little more actively in business schools, I would teach a class on listening. And the exercise I would have all the students do, these were MBA students, as I said, okay, now I want you, I paired them up and I said, okay, you're going to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And then the other person's going to practice being the world's worst listener. And it was, some people would just get up in the middle of the conversation and leave. Other people would, get on their phone, make a phone call, just all different ways to ignore the person and just be a bad listener. And the effect was amazing. The people talking would just stop talking. They said, I was getting tired of hearing myself talk.
Yeah.
And I would ask them, how long you think I gave you to do that? And they'd say 5 minutes. And I would say, no, it was 60 seconds. But the best part was several students said, when I was ignoring them and being a bad listener, I realized that was really natural for me. Like I was comfortable doing that.
Oh yeah.
I probably need to work on that. So
that's such a fabulous exercise. Yeah. There's another kind of one that I've been doing with a colleague of mine, some training with police departments around empathy and emotional intelligence. But one exercise we do is we have a conversation where you're seated with the person, and then one person standing and the other person is talking the story. And so even there, it gives the impact of posture and connection, etc. So getting on people's level as reverse kind of, and then one speaking from standing or below. So it's very interesting as well. All of those changes are subtle, but have massive impact.
Yeah, I had a client of mine several years ago, and she said, whenever she would do performance reviews with an employee, rather than sitting across from them, like it was adversarial, she would actually sit next to them and put the performance review in front of them. So they're kind of like, we're working on this together. Which kind of goes to your point around body language and positioning and how. Yeah,
I love that idea. I always say to people, if you've got a tough conversation and it's with an important relationship, I say go for a walk, because that side by side is very interesting. The dynamics take it away from what you've just said there of kind of being confrontational and sitting across from each other in a table.
That's beautiful. Okay, all right, this is great. Okay, so that's a nice segue into number 4. So number 4 you mentioned was, okay, we use all these things to manage that relationship. And I think the way you said it was to its best outcome or something like that. So tell us a bit more about how do we mix all these ingredients together to create that perfect dish?
So what we're really doing then, and so this is where really you take all of those ingredients and then you get the real-time practices, say a conversation. So in that real time, you're beginning, first of all, to notice what's happening within you, and you're making modifications as you're talking. You're beginning to access data from the other person. What emotions, are we seeing any emotions in their face? What are we seeing in their body language? And then as well as that, depending on the conversation as well, so say for example, it's about conflict. Then we have done some good work on ourselves. I like to say, what's our conflict story? We all have a conflict story. Some of us go in, and some of us not most of it, but a lot of people retract. So in the real-time conversation, what are we noticing is happening? Are we noticing that this conversation is making me uncomfortable? Am I noticing that I'm kind of stepping back or want to step back? Or am I noticing that I'm really becoming hot-headed and I'm getting involved in this and I'm losing my ability to listen, etc.? So in these real-time relationships, what we're doing is we're using all this data real time and monitoring it so that we are coming to an outcome. And I think that's important. I always ask clients, I said, in any important conversation, one of the questions you should ask before, what's the outcome I'm seeking here? What would be a good conversation? What is the end point? And then just to kind of and what's my intention going into this? Because then, we can make an adjustment because, it's possible to say, you know what, I'm not reaching my outcome. This is going down another road. I need to reset. And I think that can be helpful.
Yes. So I love this idea because I think everyone listening's got those. We all have difficult conversations that we have in life that we don't want to have, whether it's a child, it's with a spouse, it's with an employee. We have those challenging ones. I was talking to a client yesterday about one he was about to have with an employee. Likely moving them to a performance improvement plan, and just kind of talking how to go through that. So I'm going to start with my first question around this. So you talked early on in self-awareness. You said you notice what you're feeling. So let's say I'm feeling really anxious or uncomfortable or just not wanting to have this conversation. Is that something that you should actually acknowledge to the other party? When you open the conversation to say, this is a conversation that is very difficult for me to have, but an important one. Is that something we should say, or should we just kind of not acknowledge that?
I think it's important for us to say, so depending on the circumstance and the context, I would say acknowledge that it's a difficult conversation. So acknowledge that, we're going to have a conversation. We're talking about topics here which are difficult topics. And I know for me, I prefer to be perhaps talking about something different. So rather than saying, this is a conversation I don't want to have, because I think that could give the wrong message too. So I think this is an important conversation and this is uncomfortable. And I think that's fine. And just to acknowledge that it is uncomfortable and I think that's fine. But I don't think you ever want to say, I prefer, I think that's obvious. I prefer not to have this, but just kind of, I think that would be important. Yeah. And I think that's important as well to, and then I think what's important is that not to dwell so much on that. Very often when we have conversations that are difficult, we get into this mind game with ourselves, which is what could go wrong. And we imagine all the things that will go wrong with this conversation.
Yeah.
And I always say, can you just change the focus and say, what if this conversation went right? What if this conversation was a good conversation, even if it's difficult, what would happen? What would be happening in this conversation? And I think that's a better energy to bring in to the conversation rather than being totally anxious of everything that's going to go wrong.
Okay, so I'm going to flip this a little bit on you. Okay, are you ready?
Sure. Yeah.
So these are all tools that we use in relationships we want to invest in.
Yes.
What about relationships we don't want to invest in? So how does EQ play into that? What do we do? So this might be that coworker that we don't trust her or him, or they seem, for whatever reason, to have malicious intent, or it could be a relative that we've decided, I'm not really sure I want to keep investing in this. How would we use some of these tools in those situations?
Well, I think primarily one of the great strengths of anyone with great emotional intelligence is boundaries. So in other words, people with good emotional intelligence know good boundaries. So in other words, yes, there are, sometimes I like to call them toxic relationships in our life, and that people with weak emotional intelligence find it very hard to draw good boundaries. In other words, and so either that's inability to say no, the inability, whatever it is, and they find, and people with strong emotional intelligence are able to have professional conversations when needed, and then as well as that are able to draw boundaries and say, you know what, I'm not going to have this conversation, or I'm not going to invest time in this. I'll be professional, or don't dump your problems on me. Sometimes people love to pull people in to conversations they're having. It's like, I'll call it like a triangle. So in other words, people are having a conflict and they love to pull you in, and then they kind of say, okay, it's your problem now. Well, people with good boundaries say, no, it's not my problem. This is your problem, and you need to sort it out. And I'm going to create my distance. So I think that the emotional intelligence is very helpful in those relationships.
I love that. It's using all those tools you said to kind of know how you're feeling and what you feel is happening in the situation, and then setting boundaries to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
And again, knowing your role in those relationships and what you want that role to be. It goes back to one of your questions of what do you might want this outcome to be. So that's great. Yes. Okay, this is fantastic. Well, is there anything around just that general beach or sandbox of emotional intelligence that we haven't talked about yet that you think would be helpful for our listeners?
So one of the things I would just say is emotions are contagious. We've been living in a year now of this pandemic, this invisible pandemic, which has altered our lives. And I always say to people, emotions are contagious too. So be very deliberate in what you sow every day. And know, especially if you're in a manager or a leader role, people are paying notice to how you show up. And if you show up in an emotional state that is not helpful, it will be caught. And I think very often we just need to be cognizant of that power of emotions and our power to adjust any situation through our emotions.
I love that. And it's such a good reminder for us too that, so if the storms are kind of rocky around you and your team, you want to be the calm, captain of the ship. But you also might want to come in and motivate your team and be positive and inspiring, because maybe they're, kind of on the 25th mile of the marathon, and you want to get them to the final push. So
absolutely,
being thoughtful and intentional about how do I want to show up, and what do the people around me need today. That's great. I love that. Okay. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. So I always ask all my guests this question, Irvine. So if you could think about one life hack you have for us for how we can have either better conversations or build better relationships, either at work or at home, what might that be? So
as human beings, we have a bias to words. And when we have conversations or planning important conversations, we mull over what we'll say. And very rarely do we mull over what emotions might I feel in this conversation. And I always invite people to say, as you're preparing for a conversation, just think, what emotions might be evoked in me? And if that happens, how will I deal with that? So if I get angry, what am I going to do? Or if I feel disgusted, or if I feel fearful, what am I going to do? That can be really powerful for having better conversations too.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic, Irvine. This has been absolutely fantastic, and I love not only the structure you gave us to think about emotional intelligence, but all the practical things in there. I mean, I have 2 pages of notes, so this was great. So if people want to learn more about you, buy a copy of your book, Leadership Lessons from the Pub, or just follow you, where can they go?
So first of all, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My website, irvinenugent.com, my name. There's lots of different resources in there. irvinenugent.com/book has got the book. And then just 2 other things that people might be interested, 2 free resources. One is I put a YouTube video every week on Wednesday, and it's all about emotional intelligence in the workplace and at home. It's under my name. And then the second thing is if you go to irvinenugent.com/gift, I have a free introductory course to emotional intelligence, which kind of recaps some of the exercises that we did today and gives you downloads for those exercises because really emotional intelligence is all about practice.
Yeah, Irvine, well, this is great. It looks like I've got some practice to do. So thank you.
Me too.
This is great. I know I say this every week, but wasn't that a great show? I mean, it really was a great show. I've got 2 pages of notes from Irvine here on ways that we can kind of grow our emotional intelligence. I love that he broke it into those kind of 4 basic, simple steps. We have self-awareness. We've got the ability to kind of notice and manage our own emotions. So we're managing our own emotions and how we're feeling and thinking. And then we start to think about others. And we're able to put ourselves in other people's shoes, what they're feeling and thinking. And then we use all those things to make that relationship optimal. And so to go into a little more detail, he talked about self-awareness. He said we got to check in with ourselves. How are we feeling during a day? And really listen to our body. And he kind of recommends we do that kind of multiple times during the day. And then we talk about managing our emotions. He said, you practice it. I love to have a 7-second reset. So if you know you're going to be in a situation where someone might trigger you, which he talks about trigger prints, another beautiful phrase he's got, know what you might do in that situation and plan for that 7-second reset. And also think about when you do have those trigger points, you've got that person that just irritates you or triggers you in some other way, to be curious about that. What is it that they're doing that's making you react that way? What value are they violating? And then as we kind of talked about it together, we talked about kind of when was the time you felt that before, and the time you felt that before, and the time you felt that before. So you can kind of track back to the history of that trigger print so you can gain a little bit better understanding of it and manage it better. And then he flips us over into how we can better think about and build empathy for other people. And listening was a big part of that. So we talked about how we could listen better and how we could ask more questions, we could get curious. He talked about ways that we can stay present, paraphrase, which was another thing we talked about, and even body language. Like, are we keeping ourselves at the same level as the person? And maybe we're just going to go for a walk, so we're kind of next to each other. All those ways that we can kind of show up as more empathetic and really try and get a better understanding of others. And then finally, we talked about how do we take all that stuff and we put together so we can really make that relationship optimal. And so he makes a really important point. I hope you heard it. It's something I really want you to hear again. We start by this question: what is the outcome that we want from this relationship? What's the outcome we want from this conversation or this relationship? Start there. And he even said, we get so fixated sometimes on worst case scenario. Try and think about, well, what would I really want to have happen? How would I want this to go? What if it went really great? And then he even said, when you're getting ready to go into one of these, and you're feeling tension, what is your conflict story? How do you react to conflict? Do you pull back? Do you get more aggressive? And know that so you can prepare yourself to show up in the way you want to show up. We had a little bit of conversation around relationships we don't want to invest in, and he made the important point that as we develop our emotional intelligence, we also can develop our boundaries. People with high emotional intelligence have strong boundaries, and they know when to say, you know what, that's kind of your thing, that's your stuff, that's not my stuff, don't put that on me. And then lastly, he did talk about emotions being contagious, and that we want to be really deliberate in how we show up. I think all those were absolute gifts that Irvine gave us. I think I could have him on for show after show after show, and it would make us better and wiser. So I hope you took away as much from it as I did. And so go out there, practice it, and see how you can make your EQ that much better.
Thanks so much for listening to the Workplace Therapist Show. For those of you who've written a review, thank you so much. And for those of you who haven't, well, why not? It helps other people find our show and grow our tribe. We're on a mission here to make the workplace a better place to be, and we need your help to do it. If you'll just take a few minutes to share your thoughts about the show, it could really help us out. I'm going to share one today with Jeff M., who writes, Brandon draws wise and experienced leaders into insightful conversations that will help your office, family, and organizational cultures. I've learned so much. The benefit of non-anxious leadership, organizational transition, managing a diverse team, communicating clearly, and so much more. Listen, you won't regret it. Thanks, Jeff.